When he laughed, it wasn't just a joke, it was a message. I'm 41, born and raised in Chicago, and I've spent more than half my life behind bars. Not the prison kind, the drinking kind. For the past 8 years, I'd been working 6 nights a week at Rick's Tap Room, a local dive in Wicker Park run by a guy named Rick Thompson. He wasn't cruel, just dismissive. The kind of boss who thinks he's your friend until you ask for a raise. He'd been running the place since the late 90s, and in his mind it made him untouchable. We had a slow Tuesday night, the kind where the ice melts faster than the customers show up. I was wiping down the counter, thinking out loud more than anything. You know, I said, I've been thinking about opening my own place someday. Smaller, more personal, maybe a whiskey-forward concept, something with real character. Rick leaned back on a bar stool, sipping his Miller Lite like it was champagne. Then he laughed, a long, loud laugh that echoed across the empty bar. You? He said. You can barely manage this place without screwing up orders. You'd last a month tops, probably fold before your first liquor license clears. I didn't respond, just smiled like it was funny too, but something in me snapped a little. Later that night, I stayed after close, finishing up inventory. His laughter still rang in my ears. I'd spent years helping this place survive, handling deliveries when Rick forgot, covering shifts when others flaked, training bartenders who'd leave after 2 weeks. I knew how the bar worked. Hell, I knew how he worked. That laugh wasn't just him doubting my dream. It was him telling me I was meant to stay exactly where I was, serving his drinks, cleaning his mess, living under his ceiling. But I didn't say anything that night. I just went home, tossed my apron on the chair, and wrote one sentence in my notebook. Open the kind of bar you'd want to drink in. That was the last night Rick ever heard me talk about dreams. From that point on, I let my silence do the heavy lifting. After that night, I stopped talking and started planning. I didn't tell anyone, not my co-workers, not my girlfriend, not even my brother. Every idea, every number, every observation went into a small leather notebook I kept in my back pocket. I filled its pages during smoke breaks, after shifts, in the quiet corners of my studio apartment. Names of bars I liked, cocktail recipes customers raved about, sketches of floor plans, names of local distillers, notes on music, lighting, furniture, everything. At work, I became more observant. I watched how Rick ordered supplies, always last minute, always overpriced. I noticed which drinks sold best and which just took up shelf space. I paid attention to customers who left early, annoyed by the noise or the smell or the staff's attitude. I wrote down complaints, even if they weren't mine to fix. Rick wasn't watching. He thought I was just another lifer behind the bar. Some nights, when the shift ended and the lights dimmed, I'd sit alone and draft budget lists on used napkins. I'd calculate startup costs based on guesses, lease, permits, inventory, marketing. I knew nothing about commercial real estate or business loans, but I had Google and I had time. The planning gave me purpose, and strangely, it also made work more bearable. Rick's jokes didn't sting the same way. I no longer cared if he gave the best shifts to his favorites or took credit for my ideas. I was building something quietly, and he had no idea. One night, he saw me sketching something during a lull. "You writing poetry now?" he scoffed. "Something like that," I said, closing the notebook. Truth was, it was poetry, just in blue ink and numbers. I wasn't a poet, but I was writing my way out. By the end of that month, I had a checklist, not a dream, a plan. The difference was subtle, but it changed everything, and I followed it one quiet page at a time. If there's one thing you learn behind a bar, it's how to listen, not just to the orders or the music in the background, but to people, their moods, their patterns, their stories. That month, I stopped bartending for Rick and started bartending for myself. I asked better questions. Not to be nosy, but to understand. What makes people stay in a bar? What makes them leave? I paid attention when someone complimented the lighting in another spot down the block, or when a regular mentioned a bartender who just gets it. I asked what they liked, what they hated. I didn't write everything down right away, but I remembered. And later, I'd dump it all into the notebook. There was this guy named Paul, mid-50s, dressed like an accountant because he was one. Came in once a week for an old-fashioned, no cherry. One night, we got to talking. Turns out he used to help restaurants get off the ground. I kept it casual. Asked what usually killed small bars. Bad margins, poor bookkeeping, no backup cash, and pride, he said. A lot of pride. I bought him a drink that night, quietly. That conversation ended up being worth more than every tip I made that week. Over the next few weeks, I turned into someone different behind the bar. Not just a server, but a student. I learned which liquor reps were shady and which ones offered support. I learned how delivery schedules worked and which vendors gave better terms if you treated them right. I also started watching my co-workers. One of the younger bartenders, Gina, had serious talent. Her drinks were clean, inventive. She'd complain that Rick never let her try new ideas. I made a mental note. People were starting to open up around me, trust me. And I wasn't asking for anything yet. I was just gathering, quietly building the foundation of something bigger. I wasn't ready to make a move, not yet. But I was close. Close enough to start looking across the street. I walked past it every day on my way to work. It was a small, dark-bricked storefront wedged between a tattoo parlor and a laundromat. Used to be a juice bar that went under during the pandemic. Windows still dusty. A for lease sign crooked in the glass. I must have passed it 100 times before I stopped to really look at it. One morning, I stood across the street with a coffee in hand, watching the early light hit the front. It had something. Not charm exactly. Potential. That afternoon, during a lull in the shift, I Googled the number on the lease sign. A guy named Mike picked up. Friendly. Said he'd been trying to find the right tenant for months. The next day I asked for a late shift so I could see the place during daylight. It was small but solid. Original hardwood floors, exposed brick walls. The plumbing was outdated, but the bones were good. The rent was high, but not impossible. Mike mentioned that if I signed for 2 years, he'd knock down the deposit. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't sleep that night. The next week I met with Paul, the accountant. I showed him my budget, my notes, my research. He looked it over for an hour, tapping his pen, silent. Then he said, "You've done your homework. You're not crazy. You're underestimating costs, but the concept's sound. If you're serious, I'll help you." He introduced me to a local credit union manager, vouched for me personally. I got approved for a small business loan. Not enough to go wild, but enough to get me through build-out, licenses, and 3 months of cushion. I signed the lease one chilly Thursday morning. Mike handed me the keys in a small envelope. I walked inside, turned on the overhead light. Dust danced in the air. The silence was thick. I ran my hand across the bar counter that had once served wheatgrass shots. I whispered to the empty room, "Let's see if we can do better." Rick had no idea. He was too busy yelling about flat beer lines that night. I smiled as I cleaned the taps, knowing the door to my bar was already open, just across the street. I named it Second Round. It felt fitting. A quiet nod to getting back up after someone tells you you're done. The sign went up in matte black with gold lettering. Simple, clean. Nothing flashy. The kind of place that caught your eye because it didn't try too hard. The build-out took 6 weeks. I didn't have the money for big contractors, so I did what I could myself. Painted the walls, installed shelving, refinished the bar with help from a buddy who owed me a favor. Paul guided me through the permits, and I hired a local carpenter for the trickier stuff. Every dollar mattered, but somehow it stretched just far enough. I kept things quiet on social media. No pre-opening buzz, no big announcements, just word of mouth. Gina, the bartender from Rick's, was the first to jump ship. She texted me 2 weeks before opening. "He's killing my creativity," she wrote. "If you've got space, I'm in." I didn't hesitate. She came by that weekend and helped me stock the shelves. Opening night was a soft launch. No fanfare, no balloons, no grand opening banner. Just me behind the bar, Gina on the other side, and 20 or 30 people we trusted. Locals, regulars from the neighborhood. Some familiar faces from Rick's too, but they didn't say anything. Just looked around, smiled, and ordered their drinks. The vibe was different, warmer. The lighting was soft. The playlist was hand-picked. No top 40, just blues, jazz, and a little bit of soul. The cocktail menu was short but sharp. We had a house old-fashioned, a rosemary gin fizz, and 3 rotating specials. I poured every drink with care, not speed. By midnight, we had standing room only. People were laughing, talking, nobody checked their phones. One guy tapped the bar and said, "This feels right." Gina leaned over and whispered, "Rick's gonna lose it." I shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We're not here for that." But as I locked up at 2 a.m., I looked across the street. Rick's taproom was still open, but half empty. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt home. We didn't need a sign that said, "Now open." The bar spoke for itself. Within the first month, we had regulars. People started coming not just for the drinks, but for the feel. They'd walk in, nod to me like they already knew me, and settle in like they'd been coming for years. It was intimate, unpretentious. I made it a point to remember names, favorite drinks, little details. People noticed. Meanwhile, across the street, Rick's was starting to feel quieter. I'd glance over during deliveries or late-night smoke breaks and see him standing at the door, arms crossed, scanning the sidewalk like he was waiting for someone who never showed. Then the whispers started. Customers mentioned the mood at Rick's had shifted. The drinks weren't the same. A bartender quit mid-shift. A waitress said he cut her hours for attitude. Someone else mentioned the place smelled like mildew. None of it surprised me. More former Rick's regulars trickled in. At first they didn't say much, just sat down and ordered their usuals. After a drink or two, they'd open up. "Place just feels dead now," one guy told me. "Yours feels alive." Another said, "I used to drink across the street every Friday for 10 years. But man, it's different now." I'd just nod, pour the next round and say, "Glad you're here." I didn't talk about Rick, never trashed him, didn't need to. People drew their own conclusions. Even some of Rick's old vendors started calling me. A rep from a major liquor distributor asked if I wanted better pricing. "Rick's not ordering much anymore," he said casually. "Figured you're the one to watch." We weren't raking in cash, not yet, but we were steady, solid. The kind of growth you feel in your gut before you see it in your books. I reinvested every spare dollar. New glassware, better lighting, fresh herbs for garnishes. Gina brought in 2 friends from a craft bar uptown who wanted in. I gave them Tuesday nights. And every evening, as I wiped down the counter and looked through the window, I saw Rick's neon sign flicker, just a little dimmer than the night before. It was Gina who handed me the resume. She was organizing paperwork in the back office on a rainy Thursday when she called out, "You might want to see this." I walked in, wiping my hands on a bar towel, and she held up a single page, smirking. There it was, Rick Thompson. No cover letter, just his name, his experience, owner and manager of Rick's Taproom for 23 years, and a cell number at the bottom. I stared at the paper for a good 10 seconds before I spoke. "You think this is a joke?" Gina shook her head. "He came in while you were out picking up that whiskey order. Said he's looking for work. Didn't recognize me, I guess." I sat down and read every line. He'd listed everything. Inventory management, scheduling, staff training. No mention of why Rick's had closed last week, but everyone already knew. Health inspection issues, bad reviews, dwindling sales. The writing had been on the wall for months. The final notice had gone up 3 days ago. Permanently closed. I told Gina to file the resume. Not throw it out, file it. 2 days later, I called the number. "Rick Thompson," he answered, flat but polite. "Hey, Rick, this is Martin from Second Round. I got your resume." There was a pause. "Oh, yeah, thanks for calling," he said, his voice tightening. "Didn't realize it was you behind that place." "Yup, been open a few months now. Would you be open to an interview?" He hesitated again. "Sure." I scheduled it for Monday afternoon. Quiet time. No staff, no music. Just me and him. The moment he walked in, I could see the weight he was carrying. Same leather jacket, same limp from his old back injury, but his energy was different, quieter. He looked around the bar, tried not to let his eyes linger too long. We sat at a table near the window. I asked the usual questions. "Why do you want to work here? What do you think you can bring to this team?" He gave decent answers. Nothing remarkable, nothing arrogant either. It felt surreal, sitting across from the man who once laughed at my dream, now trying to join it. But I didn't say a word about that. Not yet. I waited until the end of the interview to say what needed to be said. Rick looked tired. Not physically, though the years were showing, but tired in the way someone looks when they've run out of stories to tell. He tried to hide it behind polite answers and stiff posture, but I could feel it. When we wrapped up the formal questions, I stood up and walked behind the bar. "Want a drink?" I asked. He hesitated, then gave a half smile. "Sure, whatever's good." I made him the same drink he used to order at his own bar. Bourbon, single cube, no garnish. He didn't realize it until I placed it gently in front of him. He stared at the glass for a second too long. "Still your drink?" I asked. His eyes lifted slowly. "Yeah," he said, voice lower now. "Still is." I sat across from him again. Silence stretched between us like a heavy curtain. The bar was empty. Late afternoon light filtered through the front window, hitting the glass on the table just right. I leaned forward, elbows on the wood. You remember that night? The one where you laughed when I told you I wanted to open my own place. He looked at me, then down. I do, he said quietly. Didn't think you'd actually go through with it. You said I'd last a month, maybe less. He nodded, then took a sip. I was wrong. I didn't need to say anything more. The moment had already happened. Whatever apology might have been waiting in the silence didn't matter anymore. I'd already won, not just the bar, not just the customers, but myself back. I appreciate you coming in, Rick, I said, but I don't think this is the right fit. He nodded. No protest. Just a quiet, tired nod. He finished his drink, stood, and left the glass exactly where I'd placed it. On his way out, he paused at the door, then glanced back. Nice place, he said. Thanks, I replied. I built it for people who believed in second rounds. He didn't answer, just pushed the door open and walked into the street. I didn't feel triumphant when Rick walked out. I felt calm, still, like the last piece of something had finally settled into place. I sat there for a while after he left, just watching the ice melt in the glass he'd barely touched. No rage, no gloating, just quiet closure. I'd imagined that moment 100 different ways over the past year. In some versions I'd call him out, list every petty slight, every insult, every time he dismissed me. In others, I'd offer him a job and make him beg for it. But none of that felt right when it actually happened. He wasn't a villain, just a man who couldn't imagine someone else growing beyond the role he'd given them. I realized then, the laughter that night wasn't really about me. It was about his fear of change, of irrelevance, of watching the next wave rise without him. And that wave, it had already crested. I cleared the glass, rinsed it out, and slid it back onto the shelf. Another customer walked in, one of our regulars. I greeted him with the same smile I gave everyone, poured his drink, asked about his day. The bar was starting to fill. Gina came in, high-fived me on her way to the service station, and flipped the music on. The hum returned. That low, warm sound of people talking, laughing, connecting. My bar was alive, and I didn't need revenge to feel it. Later that night, I stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, just watching. The staff moved with rhythm. The customers looked relaxed. The lights hit the bottles in a way that made the back bar glow. It all felt earned. Rick hadn't destroyed me. He hadn't even slowed me down. His laugh had lit the match. But I built the fire, and I let it burn slow, with purpose. That was the real difference between us. I didn't open second round to prove him wrong. I opened it to prove to myself that I could live without his permission. And I did. Some nights, after we close, I stay behind. I dim the lights, wipe down the counters, restock the shelves for the next day. There's something sacred in the quiet after the crowd has gone. The bar exhales, the music fades into memory. What's left is just me and the space I built with my own 2 hands. Second round isn't just a bar. It's my second chance, my proof. Not to Rick, not to anyone else, but to myself. I spent years believing that where I stood was where I'd always be, that someone like me couldn't start over. But that wasn't true. I wasn't stuck. I was just quiet, waiting for the right moment. Now, every bottle on the shelf, every groove in the wood, every name I remember across the counter, it all says the same thing. You made this. Some of our regulars know the backstory. Most don't. They just know it feels good here. They know their drink's made right, the music fits the mood, and someone behind the bar remembers that their kid made varsity or that their dog's recovering from surgery. That's what I wanted when I started dreaming this place up. Not revenge, not recognition, just a room where people felt seen, where I felt seen. Rick doesn't come by anymore. I haven't heard from him since that afternoon. I don't need to. He served his part in this story. And now it's mine again. Last week, a new customer came in, young guy, nervous, flipping through the menu like it held answers to bigger questions. He finally looked up and said, "This place feels like, I don't know, like it means something." I smiled, poured him a drink and said, "It does." Then I turned the lights a little lower, leaned on the bar and listened, because that's what this place is for. Listening, learning, rebuilding, one round at a time.